Okay guys, thanks for joining me on the first video of Pop 'em Up Food, and today we're looking at essential skills, and our number one essential skill is knives. Before I get started, just want to remind you all, like and subscribe, bell icon, all that. Making some videos for all of you about to head off to university who have got no idea how to take care of yourself. This and Pop 'em Up Life will also be coming up soon. Please hit me up in the comment section below if you have any requests for things you want. I appreciate all the feedback. I know my editing is not the best yet, but thanks for your time. Enjoy the video. So we're looking at choosing a knife, handling a knife, caring for a knife, and just exploring the basics of knives today. So the reason I've chosen knives as our first key skill is because knives give you confidence. Using and knowing your way around a knife, knowing how to care for a knife, having one knife that maybe you keep for a long time and is your pride and joy is an important part of the cooking experience, and almost no type of cuisine is without having to chop some stuff up. Okay guys, so first things first, a little introduction to knives. This is a Wusthof Classic 8-inch kitchen knife, and it's about as knife looking as you can get. And we're going to use this knife to introduce you to some of the major parts and terminology of a knife. The first part being the tip. The tip is the part of the knife that's used for carving and for cutting small pieces of food, when you require a bit more precision than the full length of the blade. The next part of the knife we're going to look at is the spine. The spine is the unsharpened side of the blade that runs from the tip to the handle of the knife. It gets thicker towards the handle and thinner towards the tip, and it provides the blade with its strength. On the other side of the blade, we have the sharpened side, and this is of course known as the edge. The edge runs down the entire side of the blade and it's sharp, or it should be, and this does all of the cutting work. At the base of the blade we have the heel. The heel is used for cutting things that require just that little bit more force, and this is due to the fact that the spine is thick at this point of the blade, and it makes the blade very strong. Moving our attention away from the business end of the knife now, we're going to come and have a look at the bolster. The bolster is the part of the blade that becomes very thick, and it's used for balance and is one of the signs of a quality knife. The tang is the portion of the blade that sits inside the handle. The weight of the tang and the bolster combined to produce the balance of the blade. Last but not least, we have the handle, and for the uninitiated, this is the end you hold it at. On this handle, you can see the rivets that are holding the tang to the handle. If you're watching this, it's likely you don't have extensive kitchen, cooking or cutting experience. If this is the case, then knives like this large Wusthof are likely to be more of a hindrance than a help when learning. The problem with a blade this large is just that. It's large, it's heavy, and sometimes, especially when you're new, you can feel like you're being led instead of controlling the knife, and that can be disconcerting, and it's not going to give you the confidence that we said that we wanted to instill. Instead, when picking a knife, I recommend something light, medium sized, that can be used for many different applications. This was the first knife I ever bought. It's a Wusthof Santoku, and it stood the test of time really well. As long as you pick a medium-sized blade and don't go too large or too small, you're going to be doing fine. It's going to take time to learn how to properly use, sharpen, and care for your knives. So, for your first knife, just remember that a beautiful Japanese carbon steel blade or a Damascus blade may end up being ruined. You need something that's comfortable in your hands, and you're not going to worry about trying to learn how to sharpen or do anything like that. If in doubt, ask a family member and see if they've got an old knife lying around. Okay, so you've got your knife. Maybe it's a tad old, maybe it just isn't too sharp out of the box, or maybe you've been using a lot and you need to make your edge sharper. How are we going to do that? Well, there are 3 ways in which we can do that. The first of those is one of these pre-made drag-through sharpeners, which I really recommend against because you're not using a skill and it's not tailored to your blade, so you need to be careful using them in the first place. So we're going to concentrate on the other 2. So we're going to use whetstones and a honing steel. This is a whetstone that has a 1000 and a 3000 grit on either side. Grit levels tell us how coarse the material is, and a lower grit means that it will remove more material from your blade. Higher grit, less material. So I've only got a 1000 and a 3000 today, so we're not going to be making any mirror edges, but it's similar to any one that you can get on Amazon nice and cheap with a dual 1000, 3000 or 1003 or 8000 grit. A honing steel works slightly differently from the whetstone as it doesn't remove material from your blade. This is something that you can use daily and something that instead of sharpening the blade, we're going to true a dulled blade. It's going to move the blade back into a nice straight edge. So because we're not moving material, we can use this quite often. Now here on Pop 'em Up Food, we're not really interested in knives per se or whetstones per se, so we're just going to do a short introduction. There's lots of good information on YouTube. Here I have a whetstone that has 2 sides, so it's nice and practical. I have a fine side, which is 3000 grit, this orange side, and I have the blue side, which is a 1000 grit, slightly coarser. So the orange side really just doesn't remove nearly as much material as the blue side and is more for finishing edges, the blue side for creating an edge. So we never want to use a dry stone to try and sharpen blades. Do not try and sharpen any knife with a dry stone. You can see here the wetness on the table that this stone has already been soaking. And any time I use a stone, I'm going to want it soaking for 15 to 20 minutes before I start using it. So we're going to put this one into soak, and I really want to make sure it's submerged and any bubbling that's happening at the beginning has stopped. Okay, so once you've got the whetstone on the table, it's been soaking, just going to add a bit of water to keep it nice and wet for the blade, and I'm going to start passing the blade over the stone. I'm going to hold it for this santoku about 15 degrees, but if you've got a Western knife, it might be a little bit more. You need to have a look at the blade bevel to determine that yourself. And I'm just going to try and keep very light, even pressure and I'm doing the entire blade at once. I'm not doing the top and the bottom of the blade separately. I'm dragging the entire blade all across the stone to do this one side. And I'm going to do the one side between 15 and 20 times, keeping a nice even weight and a nice even angle on this coarser side of the stone. Then I'm going to make sure that my whetstone is nice and wet for doing the other side of the blade, and I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to do my blade from the other side. Again, keeping the angle the same and sliding the blade over. Now it's likely if you're right or left-handed, this is going to be more difficult on one side and you may feel a little bit more imbalanced. Just take it slowly on the side that you feel that you're not as confident with, and you should be fine. Once you've done that about 15 to 20 times, we're going to use the other side of our stone. So we're done with the 1000 grit now, and we're going to move over to the 3000 grit, which should enable us to sharpen that bevel that we've secured. So making sure the stone is nice and wet again, I'm going to pick up my blade, and the blade is already getting pretty sharp, certainly sharp enough to cut with, and I'm just going to start with the side that I did first again, and I'm going to rub it over nice shallow angle. Again, that's specific for my knife, the Santoku, and Japanese knives in general have a lower angle, but don't worry too much about that. I'm just keeping it here nice and level, and I'm using the entire edge is being sharpened in one stroke. I'm not doing an individual part of the blade. Again, same as before, I'm going to do 15 to 20 times over. You can do a little bit more, a little bit less. It all depends on the pressure, how even it is. I'm not a professional at this, so I do a few more. Flipping back over to our other side then, we're going to do it really try and focus on trying to keep the angle the same, pushing away from us on the other side of the blade on this slightly lower grit stone. So again, I'm going to aim for 10 to 15 passes across the stone, and at this point the knife is already probably pretty usable, probably pretty sharp, and most blades that haven't been sharpened or have been taken care of, most knives that haven't been taken care of a lot will at this point already be feeling pretty sharp and pretty usable. So now I've got a lovely, beautiful, sharp knife. I'm going to give it a quick clean, and we are ready to start using it. Okay, now if we want to use our nice, sharp blade safely, then we're going to need to hold the blade effectively for both safety and for effective cutting. And that means avoiding what we call a hammer grip. And that's where we just put 4 fingers around the handle and our thumb around, or maybe even make a fist around it. Okay, apart from that not being very effective and looking a little bit like you're in a horror film, it's just not controlled. It doesn't allow the dexterity of your hand to use the knife properly. So when we hold the knife, we're going to think about bringing our index finger onto the outside of the blade and our thumb joining the index finger. Then we're going to wrap our 3 fingers that are left around the handle. This puts our hand right in the center of the blade and allows us to be right at the area where the blade is most balanced, and gives us a lot more control. So this can take a little bit of getting used to, but really it's essential to build that confidence with using a knife and that safety with using a particularly sharp blade as well. Now, once you know how to hold the blade in your hand, we then need to know what to do with your other hand, as that's going to be the one more at risk. So for this, we're going to use what we call a dim mak. So this phrase comes from Chinese Kung Fu for the kind of like touch of death, or press of artery in Cantonese, I think. And so really we want to make a triangle with our ring finger, index finger, and as you can see by the point of this arrow, this is what we're going to place the knife up against to be able to keep ourselves safe and to be able to keep our food still. Okay, let's put this together and let's chop this leek. So end on, I've got my middle finger as the furthest forward point on the leek that I'm going to chop, and as I rotate the board round so you can see the side, you can see that I have my thumb controlling the leek's movement so that it's nice and stable. I'm then going to place the belly of the knife up against my middle finger, and your number 1 rule is that the knife is always going to be in contact with that front finger, always. That's what keeps you safe, and then as I press down through, nice and easy chop. And you can see this way I always know exactly where my cut's going to be because it's up against the edge of my middle finger, and with very little pressure, so I have a nice sharp knife and a nice hand position, I can cut in a controlled and relaxed way. So let's have a look at this from the end on. Once again making a triangle with my dim mak, using my fingers to control where my blade's going to go and my thumb to control the stability of the thing I'm cutting, picking up my knife, my index finger on the outside of the blade, nice light control, and you'll see here I'm pushing with a slight diagonal through the leek, and this just aids. If you're using a bigger, thicker knife, you don't need to do that, but this is fine. So there are two schools of thought on cutting. Here I'm showing kind of a French cut, which you see the blade being in contact with the chopping board the entire time. This can feel safe to newcomers and has its own benefits, or you can go for a more Chinese method, which is lifting the entire blade up and through the entire, still always using a diagonal cut. This allows for slightly speedier chopping, but may not be as comfortable for beginners. It's really up to you. So let's have a little look at some of the intricacies of the hand positioning. So as before, middle finger is always the forward finger, thumb holding still, and the blade is always going to be touching that middle finger as we slice downwards and diagonally in order to make the chop as easy as possible. So you'll see here that I'm actually angling my middle finger away from the cutting space, and the reason I make this kind of little triangle of space is so that the middle finger isn't at risk of just getting little chunks taken out of it as the blade coming through. Remember, we're going to be using a sharp blade now, and so we don't want to risk that chopping motion going through into the nail or the end of the finger. If you look at my thumb distance, I also try not to overextend the thumb or overextend the hand, because this makes it harder for me to control the space where I'm chopping. And so a good reference point for this is about the distance away from the chopping space that would hold maybe a tennis ball. And that leaves us really with you being able to sharpen a knife and you being able to chop vegetables safely and quickly. So you've sharpened your blade and you've used it, and is it still sharp? Well, mine was, but part of good blade management over a long period of time is making sure that obviously you keep your blade clean and dry. So after every use, give it a wash with water, not soap, and dry it off. And then you also want to use our honing steel to keep that blade as good as possible. So the way we're going to hold our honing steel is put your thumb over the end and then press the honing steel down into the chopping board. Then put your thumb over the spine of your blade, and that's going to give you just a little guide, a little spacer on either side. So you're just going to have your thumb touch the steel, and you're going to put quite a bit of pressure. You want a little bit of force with this, a little bit unlike the whetstone because we're not moving material on either side. And you're going to do some quite strong, forceful movements on either side of the blade. And you can do this about 3 to 10 times on each side, depending the condition of the blade, depending on what you've been cutting. But basically, you're just trying to keep the angle the same, and as you go through the process, you're going to slightly decrease the pressure that you put on the steel on either side. That's why you often see people do this quite quickly towards the end of when they're honing their knife. So that should leave you with a nice sharp dry blade that you can use on your further cooking adventures. So just to summarise what we've done today. So to summarise, we looked at buying, sharpening and using a knife. We said that when you want to buy a knife, you want to pick something that's light, feels good in your hand, is well balanced, and to be honest is going to be quite resilient to hold your novice abuse. We looked at how to sharpen it, and we looked at using a dim mac to be able to hold your food and to be able to safely and effectively cut food so that you can learn the basic skills of cutting and you can develop over time. Awesome guys, thank you so much for watching the first episode of Pop 'em Up Food. Like and subscribe and hit the little bell icon.